I am a legal consultant, and I deal with all kinds of cases involving Jehovah's Witnesses, and most of the cases involve blood transfusions because we're dealing with child custody matters and the potential endangerment of the child. I was listening to the testimony of a woman, a Colorado case, and she was not really wanting to answer the questions, and I had written up these questions for the attorney, and we were on the point of blood transfusions, and it was getting very controversial, and the woman she was kind of obstinate. She thought it was her religious right to not take a blood transfusion or to forbid it to her child, and she just thought that was constitutional and everything. And finally the judge looked at her and he says, "Ma'am," he says, "I have to tell you that I'm going to ask you to step out in the hall right now." Which is a little bit unusual. I mean, she's on the witness stand, all right? And I want you to think about your answers that the attorney is asking you right now, because I'm getting very interested in his questions. And I want to know exactly what the situation here is on blood transfusions. I want you to go out in the hall. We're going to take a break right now for about 15 minutes. You go out there with your attorney, and you decide what you want to do, because I can tell you flat out right now, if you're not going to answer these questions, you're not going to have custody of your kids. Now, that was a wake-up call. So she went out there, dialogued with her attorney. I just kind of peeked around a corner a little bit, you know. Bathroom was fairly close, so I was going to the bathroom about 5 times. And I just kind of watching things, and I came back in the room, and I felt fairly comfortable that, yes, we were going to get some answers here. So she got up there. And in the meantime, Lord gave me a couple more questions to put to her, and so we started. I gave her a scenario, and the scenario had to do with, well, let's say that you're in an area that you're not familiar with, and you know, you're all up on the blood stuff. You read every Watchtower and book you can imagine discussing blood transfusions. You're adamant about not allowing blood for any members of your family, and lo and behold, you get sideswiped by a trailer truck, and your little girl, 8 years old, is unconscious. You're not too familiar with the area. I mean, cops take you to the nearest hospital. The attending physician looks at the situation and says, "Ma'am, I can tell you right now that your daughter has to have a serious operation right now. She's in grave danger. She's near death. I'd like your permission, blah, blah, blah." "Okay, doctor, but no blood." "Well, I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're talking about a serious situation here. We're going to open her up. She's going to lose blood, and I'm afraid that she'll die if she doesn't have blood transfusion." "No blood." "You don't understand, ma'am. Now, I'm telling you flat out that I can't operate on this child without her undergoing blood transfusions. Maybe more than one here. We're talking about a great loss of no blood." "Okay. Ma'am, do you realize your child will die? This is my medical opinion. Your child will, in fact, die without a blood transfusion in this situation." "Okay, so you've heard it 3 or 4 times, ma'am. What are you going to do?" And she started talking about the death of her little girl. This is in front of the judge. I knew we'd won the case, because she was willing to talk about the death of a healthy little girl, you see? And that is sad. It's about as sad as you can get. My client was a very loving man, and you know, he's raising these kids in a wonderful way, I believe. But I believe that it would have been great if she realized what she was doing. But she told the truth. Now, when we're talking about blood transfusions and Jehovah's Witnesses in history, we're talking medical insanity. Let me just run down a couple of things here. I could spend an hour or two on this, but let me just give you a quick overview. The Watchtower Society has said that drugs, serums, vaccines, surgical operations are all from Egyptian black magic, and they have no value. They have called the American Medical Association journal the vilest sheet, and said the editor was the type of Jew that crucified Christ. This is all documented. They said that the medical science was an institution founded on ignorance, that tuberculosis testing was a fraud, Louis Pasteur's teachings were deadly, and that Edison's X-ray was a delusion of Satan. It's never been proven, according to earlier issues of the Watchtower literature, that a single disease is due to germs. It's never been shown conclusively there's a single, no such thing as rabies. I'm quoting. Quote, much of the looseness of our day along sexual lines may be traceable to vaccinations. I always thought it was TV. Vaccinations have never saved a single life, according to the literature, and are a cruel hoax of Satan, even responsible for the spread of demonism. Placing animal blood with man's sacred blood by serums is unscriptural. Well, I could go on on this. Of course, in 1953, vaccinations became a conscience matter, which, by the way, we are starting to see with blood transfusions piece by piece, component by component, if you will. The reason why the slowness, by the way, is just a side point I'll make, is I think it's a matter of litigation. Can you imagine the people who have left Jehovah's Witnesses eventually who had forbidden blood to their children, and those children died as, of course, martyrs to the faith, and yet now they're out, and if the organization changes on blood transfusion, what do you got? You got litigation that can go on for years and years and years and years, because the Watchtower has known all along, or it certainly should have, that blood transfusions are not unbiblical. And then, of course, there's the issue of organ transplants, which were forbidden as cannibalism, and of course, that's now acceptable since the early 80s. So, you get all this interesting history. You've even got a situation. I'm going to read out of DeVore's book. He's got a photocopy in here of 1964 Watchtower, in which February 15th, 64 Watchtower. I'll read it directly. Would it be a violation of the Scriptures for a Christian to permit a veterinarian to give blood transfusions to a pet? By all means, to do so would be a violation of the Scripture. To use blood for transfusion purposes, even in the case of an animal, would be improper. What then of animal food? May it be used if there is reason to believe there is blood in it? As far as a Christian is concerned, the answer is no. So we can see that the organization has taken some extremely strong stands, even to forbidding blood transfusions for pets. Well, someone might ask, well, what if the witness went ahead anyway? You know, maybe she loved the dog, and she wanted the dog to live, and a transfusion was given. During this time period, up until recently, would she have been disfellowshipped if she gave a transfusion to? And someone might ask, well, I don't know about that, but they might disfellowship the dog. And then somebody else might say, but, you know, based on the latest light here, what if the dog is repentant? So we've got some issues that have not really been addressed and should be addressed in the Watchtower to clearing these things up here. So if some of you want to write into questions from the readers, I really would like to know. Then there was this issue, of course, in the 80s about AIDS. And at one point, the Watchtower noted that AIDS could be found in 1983. And this is a fact. You could, in every 100 units of blood, there was a unit that had the AIDS virus in it. What you won't read in the Watchtower now, of course, is that, for instance, from the September 1999 Consumers Report, and it's now even better than this, but in September 1999, about a year ago, your chances of getting AIDS in a unit of blood was 1 in 676,000. So it's fairly good, odds there. Right now, I understand it's about 1 in a million. So the blood supply has certainly been cleaned up. Now, for the remaining minutes, next half hour here, I'm going to need your help, and I'm going to go through some things really fast. And to do this, I'm going to need your help. I want you to do something that is extremely difficult, particularly if you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness. I want for the next half hour you to pretend you are Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's going to be very difficult for you. I know this is going to be a tough presentation for me to give because I'm going to look at all these pained faces out there and these scowling faces. So try to be happy. But I would like you to at least think like Jehovah's Witnesses. I'd like to do some kind of a dialogue here with you. Because what I want to do is I want to get to the nuts and bolts of this and see what has really transpired. Now, as far as I understand it, Mr. and Mrs. Jehovah's Witness, the reason you really don't take transfusions, or at least one of the key reasons, is because the procedure mandates the storage of blood. In other words, blood has been stored to be put in your body, and you just don't believe that, and you believe that, this is the quote I got out of your literature, the covenant regarding the sanctity of blood stated after the flood is still binding today. And it covers both animal and human blood, whether one's own or another's. And then you say, based upon Genesis 9:4-6, we believe, quote, the removal of one's blood, storing it, and later putting it back into the same person would be a violation of the scriptural principles that govern the handling of blood, right? You agree with that? Okay, I knew you would, being witnesses. And then you also say, quote, we have long appreciated that such stored blood certainly is no longer part of the person. It has been completely removed from him, so it should be disposed of in line with God's law. You should pour it out upon the ground as water. Deuteronomy 12:14. Amen? Okay. So in summary, couldn't we say, Mr. and Mrs. Jehovah's Witness, that blood storage during an operation is a violation of the everlasting covenant on blood? Pretty simple. All right, so you don't take it, right? Now, help me with this. I can understand that, that we're talking about in Genesis 9, we're talking about human or animal blood. We're talking about animal blood, aren't we? Okay, not even mentioning humans there. So if I got it right, and correct me if I'm wrong here now, but if I got it right, in Genesis we're talking about the pouring onto the ground regarding the word of blood, referring to the dead bodies of animals. Is that correct? Okay, just checking. In fact, regarding blood and so forth, in this pouring on the ground and storage issues, that's really not addressed in regarding human beings, is it? In the Bible, like from Genesis to Revelation. Just checking. All right, and certainly, we would agree, it's not referring to living persons. People who are alive, okay. It is referring, however, to dead animals. Let's keep that in mind.
Killed.
Yes, dead ones. And, that's right, and killed, not by themselves. Now, they're just not dropping. Somebody stuck an arrow in them or something. I don't know. Whatever. They're dead animals. All right. Bergman, in his book, has a neat quote. I wrote it down. I think this kind of summarizes it fairly well, at least it did for me, but, you're witnesses, so you'll have to pause to think about this. Quote, because modern blood transfusions never require the slaughter or death of the donor, they are thus free from the condemnation connected with all of God's blood laws. I just thought that kind of summed it up, for me at least. So there's no mention of storing it. So I think that your blood teaching regarding storage is not based upon an actual Bible command, but that's just me. Now, there are two types of blood transfusions that are important to discuss here. There's an homologous blood transfusion, in other words, it's a donor-given blood, somebody else's blood. And then there's autologous blood transfusion. That means that you're receiving your own blood. Let me quote this. Medical personnel often distinguish between homologous blood coming from another person and autologous blood the patient's own blood. Autologous means derived from the same individual. In this context, it means your own blood. All right? Now, since that's from witness literature, I guess that's reliable. So I just want to quote it, make sure that we see the differences here. Autologous blood eliminates a lot of the anxieties that people may have about blood-borne diseases and so forth. They become very popular in the last few years. If you go in for an operation, they'll typically want you to schedule you to give your own blood so that they can use that blood for your operation. It's safer. Now, let's remember, and how can we forget the situation we saw a few minutes ago with Verna? She was bleeding internally. You could see the look of desperation on the face of the medical personnel when she yelled, "No blood." They tried everything. Remember, they wanted to recycle her own blood, and she would not. She refused to do that. And so Verna would not take an autologous blood transfusion. But I think that about 3 years ago, after I had had that experience I told you about in the courtroom, that I wanted to know more about this myself. Now, that doesn't mean I hadn't read everything I could out of the Watchtower literature on blood transfusions. I'd amassed probably two file drawers filled with information on blood, so but I wanted to figure this out more, so I went back and read some things, and I wish I could have shared that with Verna, what I had read, and I'm sure you wish you had been there to help her and show her some Watchtower literature. What I started to understand is a little bit more about blood circuitry. So I wrote a book called Blood's Out-of-Body Experience, or Do Jehovah's Witnesses Take Their Own Blood? I mean, after all, if Jehovah's Witnesses take blood and have, which I will go to show and prove in the next few minutes for a long time, why did Verna have to die? That was what was getting on my mind. It started to get to me that, wait a minute, can it actually be shown that Jehovah's Witnesses take blood transfusions? If, in fact, it can be shown that Jehovah's Witnesses take blood transfusions, why did people get so excited about I have it here somewhere. Here it is. A June 15th, 2000 issue of the Watchtower, which mentions various components and what Jehovah's Witnesses believe on blood and so forth. If, in fact, it can be shown that Jehovah's Witnesses, for many, many years, have been taking blood transfusions, why are people getting so excited about this? And, in fact, if it can be shown that Jehovah's Witnesses take blood transfusions, what does that do to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society right now as we speak? I'm asking you, as Jehovah's Witnesses. Talk about the blood circuit for a second. Quote, some surgeons believe it is advantageous for a patient's blood to be diluted during surgery. Some physicians have adapted this procedure, arranging the equipment in a circuit that is constantly linked to the patient's circulatory system. What I'm going to do just for aid to you is pass a couple of copies of these. A couple of brothers come up and pass them through the audiences. And as I'm talking, you can kind of think about this a little bit easier. Just look at the picture, all right, as it's being passed, so you'll know what I'm talking about. The blood is diverted into a machine. It is diluted. It is cleaned up, and it is brought back into the body. Now, this is fairly common practice. Now, let me read from a statement in 1959 out of the Watchtower literature. If the blood were stored, even for a brief period of time, this would be a violation of the Scriptures. That kind of goes along with what you guys said earlier, right? That you just weren't for storing blood. You thought that was a violation of the everlasting covenant of God in Genesis 9, right? All right. So that's what the Watchtower said. Now, but do you guys believe in New Light? How many believe in New Light as Jehovah's Witnesses? All right. New Light's a good thing, right? Hey, it's progressive. Right on with New Light, right? Okay, so in New Light came in 1978. All right, so about 20 years after they said, hey, forget it, we can't do this, in 1978 there was a discussion about the possible use of a heart-lung pump or a dialysis artificial kidney machine, if you will. You probably see these things on medical shows on TV. And the society stressed that the key thing is not really storage. Key thing is that the blood is flowing continuously. All right, it's not stopping. There's no stopping of this blood. That was the big deal. So in 1959, you couldn't store it at all, but in 1978, well, as long as it's moving continuously through this machine, you see, and back, as long as it's continuous, you have this continuous flow, it's okay. So no stoppage, right? Stoppage became the big issue. So we got the New Light stoppage in 78. That was a good one. Then the bombshell of bombshells, which I missed, of course. Being a researcher, right, and being on top of it, the only thing I feel good about is everybody else missed this one too. But anyway, in the March 1st, 89 Watchtower came out, and all of a sudden there was a statement in there that rocked my world, but unfortunately it didn't rock my world in 89, it rocked my world about 1998 when I was seriously getting back into this. And here's the statement. Page 31. The biblical emphasis is not on the issue of continuous flow. Think about it. 59. No storage of any type. 78. New Light. Well, as long as it's continuous, we're okay. 89, the one I missed. Again, the issue is not the biblical emphasis is not on the issue of continuous flow. We're talking new light of new light. All right? We're talking blood transfusions. And I will go on to show you that as sincere Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm sure you're interested in this. Running out of time. Well, so at this point in time, witnesses are permitted to accept the brief interruption of blood flow through an external device. And yet that was a major issue for 30 years, from 59 to 99. Now it isn't. So if it isn't, let's just, visualize this situation a little bit. If the blood stops in the machine, let's say. Now, you've seen the illustration. You've seen what these machines are. They have these long tubes that is attached to the body. There's filtration systems. There's blood bags. There's, all kinds of stuff. Now, let me ask you a question. It's a real toughie. Do you think that the machine is outside of the human body? How many people go for being outside of the human body? All right? To the point where you get attached to it when you go in there, in other words, and when you leave the operation, you don't take the thing with you. It's kind of like a big deal. And you don't actually take the thing home with you, do you? Okay, it stays in the hospital. It's a hospital machine. All right. I think we've got a problem here of semantics, as we usually do when we're dealing with Watchtower lingo. And I think the problem now comes down to the Watchtower is saying that as long as it's brief, you see. It doesn't have to be continuous flow. As long as it's, in other words, as long as it's, I remember the word brief or short as in terms of a brief or short time before Armageddon. All right? Remember that, it's like it's coming soon. Remember the previews that we get in the Watchtower literature? Not so much these days, but over the years we understand the word brief and short and things like that. How long is brief? All right? Well, here's your answer here in the Watchtower. The Watchtower stated that the blood shouldn't be, quote, stored for some time. Thank you. That really helps a whole lot. Now, the some time, let's see, are we talking a minute, 2 minutes, 10, 15, 20, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours? All of these time frames I have read in the Watchtower literature as being permissible in various contexts. So, and there's no outside limit as far as I have read. If someone has read of an outside limit referring to this some time, I would like to know about it. Right? Just as there's no outside limit for Armageddon, there's no outside limit for this brief period in which the blood stops. Where does it stop? They're not talking about it stopping in the body, folks. They're talking about it stopping outside the body. All right. Now, let me sum up this thing by a Watchtower clear statement, which I'm sure you're all tuned to, it being that you go to 5 meetings a week. Quote, if the flow of such autologous blood stopped briefly, such as if a heart-lung machine is shut down while the surgeon checks the integrity of coronary bypass graft, right? You got that so far. All right. Then, this is not considered any differently than, quote, if a person's heart might stop briefly and then resume. Glad you got that. What that means, I'm not sure. The point is that the blood, and this is also in the literature, can be infused back into a person's body, such as, I got an example of a patient who was an 8-month-old infant here of Jehovah's Witnesses. That can be infused at the end of an operation. Let me quote. At the end of the procedure, all autologous blood was reinfused and fluorocidamide was given for diuresis. For this family unwilling to consent to the conventional blood or component therapy, hemodilution offered an acceptable alternative. In other words, folks, the blood was out basically during the operation, and at the end of the operation, after being cleaned up and so forth, the blood was put back in. That's certainly a long, quote-unquote, brief interruption of blood flow, isn't it? What is the, by the way, since you folks are Bible students and attend the Bible meetings on a constant basis, could you give me a verse which addresses the timing of blood storage? Just thought I'd ask. Question, what is infusion? Webster's dictionary describes infusion medically as, quote, the slow introduction of a solution into the body, specifically into a vein. Can you accept that? Okay. This is intravenous, all right? And without going through document after document, which I could do, let me just state that blood infusion is blood transfusion. I think that's pretty well established. I'll give you one quote. For instance, if I was in the hospital and I, quote, had not eaten or had anything to drink for several days, the attending physicians would find it was necessary to feed my body by infusion. Okay? So, what is reinfusion? Reinfusion is a repeat process of infusion, all right, to do it again, continuously. So in an auto-transfusion, folks, if you can visualize this, and that's why I'm passing the picture around, or the illustration, the blood is reinfused into the body infused into the body repeatedly, and so for what we find, you've got a constant infusion of that blood into the body. Now think about this as we're talking about it. And when did the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society introduce the word reinfusion in its literature? 1989. I didn't know that either. If I had realized the full implication, I think, of reinfusion, which is the process of continuous blood coming into the body and out of the body and so forth, continuously coming in. If I'd known that in 89, I would have given this talk 10 years ago. But I didn't know it. Question, I got about 10 minutes. I'd love to take questions, and I will, but I have to take them after. I've got 5. My watch, it doesn't work. Okay, I'm going to skip things, but let me just get down to the nitty-gritty here. I think that Jehovah's Witnesses, and this is the tragedy of the whole thing, is that just as the Watchtower organization has speculated upon the end of the world and what paradise is going to be like. By the way, if paradise is going to be the way that they express it, I don't think I want to be there. But it's everything is speculation, and I think everything is fantasy. And I think when we're dealing with blood transfusions with Jehovah's Witnesses, we're engaging in medical fantasy. The problem is that we're also dealing in lives. So this is a life and death fantasy. And I think that when we're dealing with hemodilution and the fact that this blood actually leaves the body and so forth through these tubes, what I have coined it, and you can read about it in the book that we've written if you'd like, is the circulation elongation fantasy. All right? In other words, they're actually believing that witnesses are thinking that when the blood is attached, is within the tubes, that blood is actually within the body. Okay? Well, common sense and a good doctor will tell you, no, this is called a machine, It's not. It's going in there because if it's in your body, it will not do the things we need it to do by the time it gets back into what? Your body. All right? So it's the circulation elongation fantasy. Let me make a conclusion. And this conclusion will deal with things I haven't addressed a lot because of time elements, but I think you'll get my point. How resolute is the witness when he's faced with a decision to take blood or not? This is from your Health Care Advance Directive. This is a direct quote. On the basis of my firmly held religious convictions, see Acts 15, 28, 29, and on the basis of my desire to avoid numerous hazards and complications of blood, I absolutely, unequivocally, and resolutely refuse homologous blood, another person's blood, and stored, that's italicized, autologous blood, my own stored blood, under any and all circumstances, no matter what my medical condition. I mean, we're talking serious stuff. And as we've seen, unfortunately, folks, we got a problem here. Because when you sign this, you're engaged in a cartoon. This isn't real. You've been taught stuff that isn't true to make that particular statement. Unfortunately, it might be for your child. All right. Your Watchtower Society has broken their own rules on blood. And here, I'm going to skip through them real quick. Rule number 1, blood storage during an operation is a violation of God's everlasting covenant on blood. This is supposedly based on Genesis 9. Remember what you claimed. Okay, this rule was tightly enforced. It was claimed that witnesses are, quote, are not trying to see how close they can walk to the line without overstepping the law. Oh, come on. We're now in the 21st century. Let's talk about components, for the next 5 hours. But this is what it was said. They are not trying to see how close they can walk to the line without overstepping the law. No, not at all, of course. They avoided, quote, doing anything that even resembled violation of the divine prohibition, quote unquote. This meant there was to be no stoppage of blood outside the body. Quote, if the blood were stored even for a brief period of time, this would be a violation of the Scriptures. However, since 89, as I said, we've seen that this whole rule has been broken. And, of course, the term would be adjusted. Rule number 2, once the blood is out of the body, it must remain poured out, right? This is the testimony. Remember that according to God's law, even through Moses, blood removed from a creature was to be poured out on the ground, Deuteronomy 12:24. We today are not under the law code, but the underlying message is that blood is sacred, and when removed from a creature's body is to return to God by pouring it out on his footstool, the earth. All right? However, folks, since this blood is now being allowed to be recirculated back into the person, rule number 2 is broken. Well, I think the reply would be this has been a new understanding. Rule number 3, autotransfusion must not allow storage. Autotransfusion is acceptable to many Jehovah's Witnesses when there is no storage of a patient's blood. That's no storage, right? No storage. We know right now that a Jehovah's Witness no longer has to consider the issue of continuous flow. It can stop, and it can be temporarily stored within the body. All right? We went through that. So that rule is now broken. Rule number 4. Eating human blood is forbidden. Now, if transfusing is considered eating, quote, a feeding upon blood is an unscriptural practice, unquote. Since 1989, what has happened? Right? Witnesses are allowed full freedom, 100% on autotransfusions. My friends, since 1989, Jehovah's Witnesses have been taking blood. You want to shout something out? It should have been shouted to Vernon in the hospital. Since 1989, Jehovah's Witnesses have been taking blood. That is the news. Now, guess what? In the September 1990 issue of Our Kingdom Ministry, the Society says, quote, this is just what, a year ago. Decide conscientiously. Now, the word conscientiously is going to come up a lot. If you can allow use of machines that circulate blood outside the body. Why? Why would you have to decide conscientiously if you can use machines which allow blood to circulate outside the body unless the Watchtower is trying to kind of get you to understand that actually for the last 10 years, before that Kingdom Ministry came out, Jehovah's Witnesses have been allowed to allow blood to circulate outside the body. But they know that most witnesses don't know this. And so they're saying, well, maybe you want to think about it. What are they really saying? Decide conscientiously, folks, if you can take a blood transfusion. But they can't use those words. So that's why they're using the words I'm referring to. Well, I'll just end it this way. I think I'm getting the red flag. I'll just end it this way, and that is that with the information that we have, we can, in fact, not only show a sincere Jehovah's Witness that he might be able to save his own life or the life of his child through the literature that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society has provided. And that's the key thing. From the Watchtower Society's literature we can show this. But then, after that, one of the big questions might be asked. Am I really in the truth? Okay.
James and Vernon Giannopoulos were on their way to church when their car was crushed in an intersection. James is in cardiac arrest.
So on this gentleman, we need to get blood quickly. We need to get the blood gas quickly. Get him on the ventilator. I think when you're in charge and everybody's looking to you for help and for guidance, I think that it's important that you are cool. And he needs to get this container fast. So we're going to time this because somebody's life is depending on you.
Paramedics have managed to revive James's heart, but he is still clinging to life. James's wife, Verna, is conscious and stable.
We're about to go to the trauma center, okay? Things are going to happen really fast. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, right close.
Back. Maria Bethany was given this life.
Why?
So it looks like primarily the driver's side was struck. And he was the driver. And his car, they were in a van, and the van was front.
What's the pulse rate? He does not have a femoral pulse. Yes, he does have a femoral pulse.
James's pulse is unstable, a sign that he may have internal injuries.
It's not a good pressure.
James has a massive head wound and is barely alive. Only 6 feet away, his wife Verna lies unaware.
You remember the whole thing? You know where you are right now? Okay.
Can I get another chest tube?
What size, 36?
Just whatever you have. Get 32.
James is bleeding into his chest. To relieve the pressure, doctors drain the blood surrounding his lungs.
Everything that we're doing right now, we're doing to try to help you. You have pain in your chest? Well, we're just worried that you may be bleeding.
What's hurting you? Okay. That's where your ribs fractured.
James's blood pressure is dropping. He needs a blood transfusion to survive.
Can we call the blood bank, please? Someone call the blood bank.
We have to have it available. We have to have it available.
No. They're Jehovah's Witness, no blood.
No blood.
No blood.
James is a Jehovah's Witness, and his religion forbids using blood products, even if it's a matter of life and death.
Your husband accept blood if it was... Okay.
I'm from blood bank. Are you going to transfuse? If not, I need to go.
No, we're not. Deep inside, you're like, why? You don't understand it. It was hard for me to understand why she would want blood. If you need blood, you get blood. And it just doesn't make sense.
James Giannopoulos' pulse is fading. He has lost too much blood, and Dr. Lahiri can't give him the transfusion he so desperately needs.
You get so emotionally involved that it kind of drains you. It's a connection with another person.
With a severe head injury and massive internal bleeding, James Giannopoulos is unable to hold on. He has lost too much blood.
We try our hardest to save those people, but, you know, frequently there are things that we can't do. There are patients that we can't save, and it is hard, but, you know, it's our job, and we come to work every day to save people's lives.
Verna Giannopoulos has yet to hear of her husband's death from the car crash, but Dr. Lahiri and her attending Dr. Richards are worried. The CAT scan shows she is bleeding internally.
Are you having any pain anywhere? Right in here? Okay, what about your belly? It's looking like we will take her to the operating room. I think in her it's better to go earlier than later because she won't accept any blood. And so we can get her intubated, help her breathe, and then fix her problems in her abdomen. You have an injury to your spleen? Okay. You need an operation.
Am I gonna die?
We don't know that. I don't think so. We're going to take good care of you, okay? Could we give you your own blood back to you? Your own blood? Your own blood back? No. Okay.
No.
And you understand that you could die without it? I could make her better, faster, if she had the blood.
Where is Jimmy? Where is Jimmy?
His heart stopped. Bleeding into his head, and he was never awake, and he was never in any pain. Okay?
Help me. Help me. Help me.
Verna Giannopoulos is bleeding internally, and Dr. Lahiri must operate without giving additional blood.
She has some blood around her liver and she has blood around her spleen, so she may have injuries in both of those organs.
Don't move your head. Don't move, man. Don't move your head.
My mouth.
She says emphatically that she does not want blood. We have a system where we can recycle her own blood, and she refused that also.
They have to work at a breakneck pace. If the operation takes too long, Verna could lose too much blood and die.
Two.
You guys know that she's a Jehovah's Witness. We've got some scar tissue. We're having problems getting in the abdomen.
With each passing minute, Verna loses a little more blood.
2 steps, another one for me, also.
If it were my mother or father, I would want them to have blood. But in this case, you have to combine the science and the religion. Uh-oh. There's hematoma there.
We have a hole in the small intestine here.
Oh my gosh, what's it going?
Do you have her last hematocrit?
Verna's blood level is critical. Dr. Lahiri needs to finish the operation.
She has a diaphragm injury, which we repaired. She had a small bowel injury we also repaired, and a tear in the mesentery.
She's very, very sick. Her blood level has dropped. It's extremely low, and there's a possibility that she won't make it out of the hospital.
Verna Giannopoulos has survived the operation, but her blood level is extremely low.
Verna, open your eyes. Open your eyes for me. Can you open them up?
At this point, I'm not sure how she's going to do in the future.
Are you in there?
It's kind of an hour-by-hour, day-by-day thing for her.
She's somebody's grandmother, you know? She looks happy. It looks like she had a good life. Even though her husband did die in the accident, she still has a lot of caring family that's still around, and I think they'd be very happy to take her home.
If you can hear me, Ma. It says, though against me and an encampment should pitch tent, my heart will not fear.
Verna's son David has come to pray at her bedside. He is also a Jehovah's Witness.
The scriptures really condemn the use of blood for personal use. Our Creator would not approve of that and would be offended by it, and so she has always lived by that principle.
Without the possibility of a transfusion, Verna's low blood count makes her recovery uncertain.
Hope in Jehovah, be courageous, and let your heart be strong. Yes, hope in Jehovah.
It's been 1 week since Verna lost her husband in the accident. She's still holding on.
Her blood level dropped down to the lowest of 10, and we're giving her medicines to help her blood form quicker, and her blood level's up to 16 now. She's getting better. I think it's pretty close to a miracle. So we're just watching her day by day. So I'm real encouraged about it, and I'm excited. So we'll have to see how she does over the next few days.
My mother likes to have her feet rubbed. I went to see the vehicle when we went to collect the personal effects, and it was amazing that she survived.
But Verna Giannopoulos never regained consciousness. She died 2 weeks later of complications at University Hospital.